Hello again. It may come as a surprise to many viewers that the law of Britain requires schools to begin the day with an act of collective worship of a broadly Christian nature. This is actually a legal requirement under the Schools Framework Act 1998. Older viewers will of course remember the time when there was a morning assembly and pupils listened to readings from the Bible, sang hymns and said the Lord's Prayer together. It was a unifying experience which gave every adult in the country a common cultural framework. Children grew up being familiar with stories from the Bible and had some basic idea about religion. Of course, a lot of people are not religious and they think that this sort of thing, getting children to say grace before meals and so on, another common practice at schools at one time, was a lot of nonsense and that we're better off without such superstitions. I can understand this point of view, even if I don't agree with it. The problem is that people who feel that way have been greatly deceived, and although they thought they were getting rid of what they see as the mumbo-jumbo of organised Christian worship in schools, and that this would free children from religion, this is not at all what has happened. Instead, one religion has simply been swapped for another. In 2004, the then head of Ofsted announced that inspections of schools would no longer take into account whether or not the daily act of collective worship was taking place. He remarked that more than 3/4 of all secondary schools no longer bothered with this, and so although it was a legal requirement, the law in this case was moribund and might as well be disregarded. Many atheists and humanisms greeted this with delight. The fools. Flash forward less than 15 years from that announcement, which apparently sounded the death knell of religious practice in British schools, and what do we find? In the description to this video I give a link to a newspaper article about a school in Didcot in Oxfordshire. Didcot is 15 miles south of Oxford and it's an overwhelmingly white Christian town. In the last census, 16,000 people identified themselves as Christian as opposed to just 203 Muslims. An ordinary English town with just a few ethnic minorities. In 2018, this primary school announced that it would be providing only halal meat for school dinners, not because there were loads of Muslim pupils, but, and I quote, to celebrate the diversity of our country's culture. So what happens is that the daily act of collective worship of a broadly Christian nature has been scrapped because nobody wants to fuss about religion these days. However, halal meat, the preparation of which must be accompanied by Muslim prayers, is to be compulsory. This is not an exception. Many schools are doing the same thing. They have ditched Christian worship but insist upon serving meat which has been prepared under the supervision of a Muslim cleric. They do this in the interests of celebrating the diversity of our country's culture. Sikhs, Jews and Christians all object to this kind of thing, but they are ignored. Nobody cares about their culture. The London Borough of Harrow decided a few years ago that the same would apply in all their schools, even those without a single Muslim pupil. The same is true in Yorkshire, Liverpool, and many other local authorities. Christian religion goes out and Islam comes in. I'm not at all sure that this is what those progressive people who wanted to see an end to Christianity in schools had in mind. I think that they thought that modern schools would become bastions of atheism as endorsed by Richard Dawkins. Instead, they have simply substituted one set of prayer and religious principles for another. Christian prayers before meals in the form of the grace which was once commonly said before pupils ate is definitely out, but Muslim prayers over the food which they eat is quite acceptable. Work that out if you can.